Quarter 4, Module 8, solving problems involving tests on hypothesis on population mean. So in testing hypothesis on the population mean, follow the following steps below. First step is to state the null hypothesis denoted by H sub O and the alternative hypothesis denoted by H sub A. After that, second is determine the test statistic that will be used to conduct hypothesis test. To conduct the hypothesis test, then calculate its value. So basically, asa ka makabalo kung unsa siya nga test, i-test ba sa z-test, depende again sa population standard availability, sa population standard deviation, and sa sample size, number of sample size. Then after, find the critical value for the test and draw the critical region. So, kailangan nimo ma-determine ang critical value using the table. Kung unsa nga table, depende again sa unsa nga test. Kung one-tailed or two-tailed, magdepende sa imong alternative hypothesis. And lastly, decide and draw a conclusion based on the comparison of the calculated value of the test statistic and the critical value of the test. So, again, in general, we reject the null hypothesis if the absolute value of that computed value is greater than the absolute value of the critical value katong naa sa table. Otherwise, we do not reject the null hypothesis. So let's discuss an example. For kani is na gini problem. So according to a study conducted by the grade 12 students, 155 pesos is the average monthly expense for cell phone loads of high school students in their province. A statistics student claims that this amount has increased since January of this year. Do you think his claim is acceptable if a random sample of 50 students has an average monthly expense of 165 pesos for cell phone loads? Using 5% level of significance, assume that a population standard deviation is 52 pesos. So first, we determine mga given. 155 pesos is the average daw. So that is mean. Ang pangutana, unsa nga mean, sample ba or population? Since it is according to the previous study conducted, this is mu or the population mean. Based man sa previous conducted study. And then, kaning sample of 50 students, this is our N. Kaning average monthly expense nga 165 is another mean, but this time, based man sa sample. So, sample mean is yan. And then, we have 5%, so this is our alpha. And then, standard deviation, assume that the population standard deviation, so klaro, sigma na siya. So, after na to ma-determine ang mga given, we now state the null hypothesis. That's the first step. Null hypothesis na to, actually, ang pinaka-una dapat di mo i-determine is ang alternative hypothesis. Mu is greater than 155. Nganong greater than? Because sa statement or sa phrase nga, a statistic claims that this amount has increased. So, mo ning keyword, increase. So, mo po ni ang claim. So, we need to label that one as your claim. So, greater than, so usually, ang dire, equal na siya. H sub O. So, that's our null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. So, based from that, ang second step is, actually sa kani, ang second step nila, kung tanaw na to ang step nila, actually kaning 2 and 3, pwede rin ni ma-interchange. Kaya katong previous na ako discussion, nag-una man ko sa critical value. Before ko test statistic. Sa ilaha, test statistic una before ang critical value. Either ways, pareha naman na. So, kani, i-follow na lang nato tong sa module, tong suggested step nila. So, solve sa nato si test statistic. Ang question, unsa nga test atong, unsa nga formula atong gamiton? Z-test ba or t-test? So, again, based sa availability sa tuang population standard deviation. Since available siya or known, and actually, sample size nato is greater than 30, so, klaro nga, z-test ta. So, z-test. So, kani nga formula, gisolve na niya. Using that formula, gisubstitute na niya, then gisolve. So, we now have our computed value nga 1.361. For the third step is to determine the critical value. So, to determine the critical value, z-test man ta, di ba? Ang question is, gamit ta og table. Unsa nga kuan? One tail, two tail. Since tan out sa ato ang alternative. Since greater than ang atong alternative, it is a one-tail test. Specifically, right-tail test. One tail, tapos ang atong alpha, atong alpha is 5%. So, kato. Alpha nato is 5% nara, and one-tail test nara. So, duha ang possible values, positive or negative, but since greater than, positive ato ang gamiton. So, mao na ni karon ato ang critical region. So, atong, critical region, our graph. So, kung tanaw na to, ato ang critical value is 1.645 na ara diri. While ang ato ang dissolve is 1.361. Morning 1.645. Unahan sa 1.5. While ang ato ang na-solve nga value is 1.3. So before siya sa 1.3 na rin. 1.3. 1.361. So, from that, klaro kaayo sa graph pa lang nga naa siya sa non-rejection region. So, we can now decide. So, since the Z computed value is 1.361 and it lies within the non-rejection region, so we fail to reject the null hypothesis. Therefore, fail man, there is no enough evidence to support the claim. Ang claim nato is katong nag-increase, di ba? Ang decision nato is reject. Then we fail to reject. Do not reject the null hypothesis. So kung do not reject the null hypothesis ka, meaning accepted sa null hypothesis. Ang null hypothesis nagsulti na walay change. So therefore, there is no enough evidence to support the claim that the average monthly expense for cell phone loads is more than 155. This result is significant at alpha 0.05 level. Usually, akong ginakuan sa decision pa lang, ang gigamit man niya diri sa pagkuan is ang sketch sa graph. Pwede ra pug kana. Sa graph, nagamit lang siya sa graph niya. Wala to niya gi-compare ang values. Then conclude na dayon. There is no enough evidence. So that's it. Second example. Blood glucose levels for obese teenagers have a mean of 120. A researcher thinks that a diet high in raw cornstarch will have a positive or negative effect on blood glucose levels. A sample of 25 patients who have tried the raw cornstarch diet has a mean glucose of 135 with a standard deviation of 38. Test the hypothesis at alpha equals to 0.10 that the raw cornstarch had an effect. So, first, determine sa tauna sa ato ang mga given. This is a mean. So, this is mu, population mean. A researcher, based man sa previous data, a researcher thinks that the diet, so natay sample of 25. So, this is our N. Tapos, natay mean, pero based sa sample. So, this is our X bar. With a standard deviation of 38. So, kaninga standard deviation is again based sa atong sample. So, this is S, not sigma. So, nanatay alpha. So, itest na natong hypothesis. So, first step is to, after sa given, ang first step is state the null and alternative. Usually, again, ang null hypothesis is mu equals to katong unsay value nato sa mu, which is 120. Ang null, ang alternative is magdepende sa statement. Ang keyword dere is researcher, Q phrase I mean. A researcher, asa ba to? Katong will have a positive or negative effect. Pwede siya mo increase, pwede po siya mo decrease. So wala siya direction kung increase ba siya or decrease. Mao na not equal ato ang gigamit na symbol. So ang second step is to solve for the value sa ato ang test statistic. Ang question, unsa nga test? Z-test, T-test. So, since S lang ang given or sample standard deviation lang ang given, wala tay population standard deviation, and at the same time, ang sample size nato is less than 30, we use the T-test. So, T-test, solving for T, kani ang value, kani ang formula, substitute, then simplify and finalize your answer. So your computed T value is 1.974. That will be compared to our critical value. So for our critical value, unsa pod, kabalo naman ta T-test, no? So pila pod ang unsa pod nga one tail ba siya or two tail? So based sa ato ang alternative not equal. So klaro siya nga two-tailed test. And then, atong alpha is 0.1. Tapos, degree of freedom nato is 24 because ang sample size nato is 25. So, kani nga mga data atong kailangan. 0.1, 24, o two-tailed test. So, using the T-critical value, two-tailed tatanaw, tapos 0. Pila to? 0.1. So, kani. Then, nara, 0.1. Then, 24 ta sa degree of freedom. Intersection nila is kana. And since two-tailed ta, positive and negative values. So, kung tanaw na to, that is our critical value nga 1.71 na ara diri, kana positive, negative diya, positive diri. Mao ni mga rejection region nasa left part o nasa right part. Ang nasa center non-rejection region. We now try to plot katong computed nga 1.974. 1.974 positive, no? 1.974. So asa na sila karon? Naa dere duol sa 2. So naning 1.974. Tama ba po? So, klaro kaayo nga naa siya, nitungtong siya sa rejection region. So, since, kani, gigamit na po niya ang value, wala na siya nagamit sa graph. So, ang buhat niya, since the computed value is 1.974, which is greater than the critical value of 1.715, we reject the null hypothesis and support the alternative hypothesis. So we can conclude that there is enough evidence to support the claim that the raw cornstarch had an effect on the blood glucose levels. So nag-reject man ka, ang alternative imong gisupport. So, ang alternative hypothesis states that there is effect on the blood glucose man. So, in-ana siya mag-test og hypothesis. I think this will be our last example. The average IQ of senior high school students is 99 with a standard deviation of 115. A researcher believes that the IQ of senior high school students is lower. A random sample of 40 students was tested and got an average of 95. The question is there enough evidence to suggest that the average IQ is lower? Test the hypothesis at 0.05 level of significance. So first, determine sa mga given. 99. This is the average. So this is based sa previous data. This is our sample mean. Standard deviation, again, based sa previous data. So therefore, this is our population standard deviation. Then a researcher believes nga lower siya. So meaning expected less than ni siya. Left tail test or specifically one tail test, specifically left tail test siya. Sample size na to is 40, so n na to na. Then kani 95 is the average, which is based sa sample, so this is x bar. So is there enough evidence na lower? So manang alternative hypothesis na to. Then alpha na to is 0.05. So those are the given. Then again, ang mu na to, ang null hypothesis is mu is equals to 99 based ato ang given. So ang alternative na to is less than 99 because ang question niya is lower man. So based sa given, natay population standard deviation, and sample size na to is greater than 30, therefore mag-z test ta. Solving for the z value, kaniyang formula, substitute, simplify, then finalize. So this is our final computed z, negative 1.688. Then we will be comparing that value to our critical value. To determine our critical value, z test man siya, so z table atong gamiton. Then pagpangita sa z table, kailangan nato si alpha nga 0.05 and at the same time kani less than man siya. So negative and one-tailed. So one-tailed ta 5%, so 0.5. Ana, so kani and then less than, so therefore ang negative ato ang gamiton. So inanin na siya. Naa sa negative side, negative 1.645 atong critical value. So sa left side ana is the rejection region, sa right side ana is the non-rejection region. Then we will now compare katong computed na negative 1.688. Negative 1.688, unahan pa siya kay negative 1.645. So therefore, naa siya sa rejection region. So we can now draw a conclusion. So using the graph, ang yang gigamit, since the z computed value is negative 1.688 and it lies within the rejection region, so we reject the null hypothesis. Therefore, there is enough evidence to support the claim. We reject man. So ang null hypothesis again is walay change. So since we reject, we support tong na-I change. So there is enough evidence to support the claim that IQ level of senior high school students is lower than 99. This result is significant at alpha, which is equivalent to 0.05 level. So that's how to test hypothesis involving population mean. So humanata actually, we're done with solving problems involving test of hypothesis on population mean. Thank you and see you next session.